Lucas used to be a rich farmer, living the good life. But he didn't manage his farm properly and spent his money recklessly. By the time he realized how foolish he'd been, it was too late. He'd lost everything. Now, he and his wife were dirt poor, crammed into a tiny shack that barely passed as a house. The walls were full of cracks, so staying warm was impossible. When it rained, water poured in through the roof. Every day felt like a battle just to survive. For years they had prayed for a child. Back when they were wealthy, they begged God, but their prayers were never answered. Now, when they had nothing, Lucas's wife gave birth to a baby girl. "What are we going to do?" his wife cried, holding their newborn. "We can't even feed ourselves. How are we supposed to take care of this poor little one?" "We'll figure it out," Lucas said, trying to stay positive. "But first we need to find someone to be her godmother." They didn't have any family nearby, so Lucas decided to ask the wife of their neighbor. Her reply wasn't exactly comforting. "Look, my husband and I are just as poor as you. Why should we add your child to the list of things we can't afford?" Disheartened, Lucas went back home and told his wife what had happened. "What else did you expect?" she said, defeated. "When we were rich, everyone wanted to be our friend. Even the mayor invited us over. But now we're nothing. Not even a poor farmer's wife will help us." She looked at their baby, her worry etched all over her face. Winter was dragging on, and it was still bitterly cold. The ground froze at night, and in the mornings snow blanketed the earth. They didn't have proper clothes for their baby, just scraps of old fabric to wrap her in. And her bed was nothing more than the cold, hard ground. Lucas's wife kissed their baby gently, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my poor little sweetheart," she whispered, her heart breaking. Then out of nowhere, an idea struck her. Her face lit up as she turned to Lucas. "Go ask the mayor's wife to be our baby's godmother. I'm godmother to their child, so surely she'll return the favor." Lucas wasn't so sure. "You really think she'll say yes?" he asked, doubtful. "Just try," his wife urged, hope glimmering in her voice. So, with a heavy heart, Lucas set off. As he passed the fields and barns that once belonged to him, memories of better days flooded his mind, making the journey even harder. When he finally arrived at the mayor's grand house, he greeted the mayor's wife politely, passed on his wife's regards, and asked if she'd consider being their child's godmother. Her response was cold. "Do you have any idea how tough things are right now? Everyone's struggling. I can't afford to take on the responsibility for someone as poor as you. Why come to me? Surely there's someone else you could ask." Lucas, keeping his composure, replied calmly, "Well, my wife is godmother to your child." Her face turned sour. "Oh, I see. So this is some kind of tit-for-tat thing? You think I owe you? Is that why your wife agreed to be godmother to my child? Let me ask you this. What use is your wife to my child now, when you've got nothing to offer? How dare you show up here and try to guilt me into this? Let me make it clear. I wouldn't be your child's godmother even if you paid me in gold." Devastated, Lucas left with tears in his eyes. Back home, he recounted the painful encounter to his wife. She was crushed, but before despair could settle in, Lucas spoke up. "Don't lose hope," he said firmly. "I'm going to take our baby to the church myself. The first kind soul I meet on the road, I'll ask them to be her godmother." His wife, still crying, wrapped their baby snugly in an old worn blanket to shield her from the biting winter wind. She kissed her baby's tiny face and handed her over to Lucas. Dressed in his warmest clothes, Lucas held his daughter close and set off, determined yet heartbroken. He trudged along the icy road for hours, the cold seeping into his bones. Finally he spotted someone, a frail old woman. She shuffled along slowly, her bent frame wrapped in tattered, dirty clothes. For a moment Lucas hesitated. Could he really ask her? But he gathered his courage and approached her, explaining their situation, and humbly asking if she'd be willing to be his baby's godmother. The old woman's wrinkled face softened into a kind smile. She gently took the baby into her arms and said, "Of course I will. It would be an honor to be the godmother of such a precious little one, especially to a father who loves her so much." Relieved and grateful, Lucas walked with the old woman to the church. By the time they arrived, the priest was just about to call it a day. His assistant hurried over and whispered, "Some people are here." The priest groaned, annoyed at being delayed. "Now? At this hour? Who are they, and what do they want? I was just about to head home for supper." "It's just Lucas," the assistant muttered to the priest. "You know, the guy who lost everything. He's as broke as they come now." As Lucas and the old woman approached the church, the godmother noticed the assistant whispering something snide to the priest. Without a word, she reached into her ragged dress and pulled out a shiny golden ducat. She pressed it into the priest's hand as they stepped inside. The priest's eyes widened in shock. He stared at the ducat, then back at the old woman in her shabby clothes, trying to make sense of it. Quickly, he turned to his assistant and whispered, "Get everything ready for the christening." What followed was a ceremony fit for the richest of merchants. Lucas's baby girl was christened Marischka, and the priest, now noticeably more cheerful, even escorted them to the church door afterward. His assistant, likely hoping for a nice tip, walked them all the way to the gate. Sure enough, the old woman didn't disappoint. She handed him another golden ducat. The assistant's face lit up as he pocketed it gratefully. When Lucas and the old woman reached the spot where they'd first met, she gently handed Marischka back to her father. Then, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world, she reached into her pocket again and pulled out another golden ducat. This one she tucked carefully into the baby's blanket. "This is my gift to your daughter," she said with a warm smile. "It'll be enough to provide for her and give her everything she needs as she grows up. This little one will bring you and your wife so much joy and comfort, and one day, when she's grown, she'll have a long and happy marriage." Then, as if by magic, she bent down and touched the ground. Instantly, a beautiful rose bush sprouted up, full of fragrant, blooming flowers. Lucas knelt to take a closer look at the stunning roses, marveling at their beauty. When he turned back to thank the old woman, she was gone. He looked around in confusion, his heart full of gratitude and amazement. "Goodbye," he called out into the empty air. "Thank you, kind godmother." He stood there, holding little Marischka close, scanning the area as if she might reappear. He probably would have stayed there for hours, lost in wonder, if Marischka hadn't started fussing and crying for her supper. As Lucas walked back home, he couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened that day. It felt like a dream. At one point, he paused, reached into Marischka's blanket and touched the ducat just to make sure it was still there and he hadn't imagined the whole thing. He pulled it out, and before his eyes the single ducat turned into 10 and spilled onto the ground. For a moment, Lucas just stood there, stunned into silence. Then he burst out laughing, quickly gathered the coins, stuffed them into his pockets, and practically sprinted home with Marischka in his arms. At home, Lucas's wife was anxiously waiting. She was cold, hungry, and worried. There wasn't a scrap of food or a single coin in the house. When Lucas came rushing in with a huge grin on his face, she was caught off guard. He excitedly told her everything about the kind godmother and the christening. When he finished, Lucas said, "Check Marischka's blanket. The godmother left her a gift." His wife carefully reached into the blanket and pulled out the ducat. Suddenly, it multiplied. 10, 20, 30 coins spilling out of her hands and rolling across the floor. She gasped in shock and delight, her laughter echoing through the room. As they scrambled to pick up the coins, they noticed that every time they grabbed one, even more appeared. Soon, a glowing pile of gold was sitting right in front of them. Overwhelmed, they both laughed and cried at the same time. But then, Lucas's wife grew serious. "Wait, what if this money is cursed? What if the godmother was some kind of evil spirit trying to trick us or take our souls?" Lucas chuckled and shook his head. "Come on now, would an evil spirit walk into a church?" Even so, Lucas knew deep down that the godmother wasn't an ordinary old woman. Maybe she was a good spirit, sent by God to help them in their time of need. Still, he warned his wife to keep this miracle a secret. "Hide the money," he told her, "and don't tell anyone how we got it." Lucas then took one of the ducats, planning to exchange it at the mayor's to buy some food and essentials. As he grabbed his coat, he turned to his wife. "Anything else we need?" Without hesitation, she replied, "Our land, our house, our animals, our fields. Tomorrow morning," Lucas promised with a grin. Then his wife gave him a serious look. "Lucas," she said softly, "please manage everything carefully this time. No more foolishness." Touched by her words, Lucas wrapped her in a hug. "I promise for you and for Marischka. I've been foolish and caused us so much pain, but I've learned my lesson. Trust me this time." With that, he left to get supplies. While he was gone, his wife sat by the fire, cradling Marischka and dreaming about the wonderful life ahead of them. A little while later, Lucas returned, and behind him was the mayor's servant, carrying buckets of fresh milk, a basket full of eggs, and a selection of delicious cakes. The room filled with warmth and the smell of fresh food, and for the first time in a long while, hope felt like something real they could hold on to. "The mayor's wife sends her regards," the servant said with a warm smile as she entered the small home. "She's asked me to help you with whatever you need." Lucas's wife, surprised but grateful, thanked her. She watched as the servant busied herself, preparing a hearty soup over the fire. The comforting smell of the meal filled their tiny home, lifting their spirits even more. Meanwhile, Lucas set up the 3 soft feather beds he'd bought, placing them near the fire to keep his family warm through the night. The next morning, Lucas set off to buy back their farm. Word of their sudden change in fortune had clearly spread, because while he was out, the mayor's wife stopped by for a visit. Her curiosity was written all over her face as she greeted Lucas's wife. "So," she began, her tone casual but probing, "it seems your luck has turned around. How exactly did that happen?" Lucas's wife smiled politely but didn't let anything slip. "Oh, we've been so fortunate. Marishka's godmother was incredibly kind and gave us just enough to get back on our feet." The mayor's wife nodded, clearly unsatisfied with the vague answer, but she didn't press further. After she left, Lucas's wife sat quietly by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened. Her thoughts turned to Marishka's mysterious godmother, and she whispered a heartfelt thank you for the second chance she and her family had been given. Lucas, true to his word, bought back their farm. But this time he approached things differently. He planned carefully and worked hard to rebuild their life. He invested in strong, durable farm buildings and built a beautiful, sturdy home for his family. He purchased the best animals he could find, and by fall their fields were brimming with golden wheat and corn. The transformation was incredible soon. Their farm was the finest in the region. The change wasn't just in their farm, but also in Lucas and his wife. They became known as kind, generous neighbours, always ready to lend a hand to struggling farmers or anyone in need. Their own hardships had taught them to appreciate what they had and to share it whenever they could. Marishka grew up to be everything her godmother had promised, a source of endless joy and comfort for her parents. She was smart, kind, and breathtakingly beautiful. When she came of age, her beauty and grace caught the eye of a wealthy prince, who fell in love with her and asked her to marry him. Their wedding was a grand celebration, and Marishka's life was as happy and fulfilling as anyone could have hoped. As for Lucas and his wife, they lived long, healthy lives. In their later years, they often sat by the fire together, reminiscing about that pivotal day when Marishka's godmother had appeared and turned their fortunes around. With warm smiles and hearts full of gratitude, they would say, "It's amazing how life can change in the blink of an eye when kindness and a little magic come your way."